Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm MorganScorpion, and tonight I have the very great pleasure to introduce Sarah Daly. And I see we've already got somebody. Right, Metaphorest sounds a bit more natural than their metaverse. But I'm going to start off with something I've already warned you about. Is I'm going to ask, are there any local myths and legends or haunted houses where you grew up?
Um, Lots, definitely. I'm from like a small town called Dungarvan in the southeast of Ireland. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess just like really one generation behind me, they obviously grew up with minimal entertainment, minimal electricity, and even when I was growing up, where I lived, there were no street lights, so you're walking home at night completely in the pitch black. Um, but for a small town of only maybe 6,000
Yeah.
people, we had several legends. Like near me, there was an ancient graveyard, mostly just kind of half in ruins by the time I came about. Um, but my father told me a story of one night when he was walking home from the pub in the middle of the night, um, supposedly not inebriated,
Mm.
but had a full blown conversation with a man who was sitting on the wall of the graveyard, um, who he later discovered, when he looked up the name, was one of the people buried in the graveyard, according to him.
Right.
So yeah, that was the story that stuck with me as a child. Whenever I was walking past it, I'd always cross the street. I was too scared to see something or hear something. It had a really weird vibe. Definitely, it was a
Yeah.
spooky place. Um, Also, my parents uh, grew up near each other, and they grew up near an ominous sounding place called Gallows Hill, um,
Right. Yes.
which, as you can imagine,
Very
was
Jamesian.
yes. So it was basically just a really like man-made, I guess, mound. I think it once upon a time it
Mm.
used to be a fort. They recently did some excavations and found thousands of year old artifacts inside it, but more recently it was where the gallows was. So lots and lots of people will have died there. And again, very weird, unpleasant vibes around the place. No
Right.
specific stories that I know of related to it, but sort of looms large in the town as somewhere you don't really want to be at night.
Yes, the knowledge that there was a gallows there once enough would be enough to
Yes,
freak
yes.
anybody out, really.
Yeah, I think it's supposedly going back hundreds of years. It was a place of executions, and before that, sacrifices, and um, all kinds of dark and despicable goings on.
Right. Would you say any of these stories influenced your writing at all?
Um, I'm sure that they did. It was never something that felt literal. Like I probably wouldn't have made the connection at the time. But just the general, I guess, the vibe of living in a place like that with so much history and so much dark history.
Yes.
And also, I think growing up around ruins and castles, and we were always kind of visiting historical places with stories about them. And my grandmother would often come with us. Actually, every Sunday we'd go somewhere,
Mm.
some trip, some random place, and she always had stories. She was kind of like the town's storyteller, really. So she
Yeah.
was like kind of someone who would pass on the sort of stories of real life people in the town through generations. So I probably got a lot from her, and she also very much liked to embellish. So there was an element of fact, but a good old dose of tarting it up to make it a little bit more exciting. So
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sure that that added to it, like both the place and her interpretation of the place.
So would you say you took after her?
I think so. She was much more of a show woman than me. um, like she and my mother as well, and kind of going back generations, we've had a lot of like uh, dramatics in the in the family, like people in bands or in shows, or just kind of known as big personalities. So not perhaps the performative element so much, but the storytelling for sure. I think it's kind of seeped through all of my family and cousins and extended family in one way or another.
Yes, I remember getting my love of history from my great aunt Queenie, who would basically
Nice.
tell me stories of the olden days and how different things were. I
Hmm.
actually recently found out that one of my great grandparents was not only illiterate, but she didn't have a last name, which is
Oh
kind of
wow.
really kind of sad, but at the same time,
Yeah.
well, they managed, didn't they? They
Yeah, yeah,
managed,
exactly. I mean, I
you know.
guess, do you really need one?
We're a small community. You might not need one because
Yeah,
people
that's
tend
true.
to
You'd be
know
the
who
only.
everybody is.
Yeah. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
there were like four Sarah Daly's in my school. A very common name. So I could have done with
Oh,
a third.
I remember being annoyed enough that there was one other Julie. It's like, oh, whenever they called her
Yeah.
name, it's always her. It's always her, never me. I'm like, yeah, no, they meant her.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's annoying, isn't it?
We're just so very, very grateful I wasn't called John. That would have been
Yeah,
dreadful.
that's true. That would cause all kinds of other issues.
So, what was your first ever exposure to fictional horror?
um, I think I've always enjoyed reading and watching horror. Like I grew up with two much older brothers. So
Yeah.
I would always kind of get away with staying up late and watching things like The Twilight Zone, which I loved, that I probably shouldn't, have been watching. But by that time, my parents were like, we've done the parenting thing. You're fine. So probably watching the things that my brothers like to watch, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of horror, um,
Mm,
and reading their kind of hand-me-down books as well, a lot of Stephen King and
yeah.
Dean Koontz. Um,
Yes, of
I
course.
just always loved anything that is fantastical, anything that conjures up another world, whether that be horror or fantasy or sci-fi. Those things have just always appealed to me both in terms of what I watch and read and what I naturally create.
Yeah, so you would be there for far too young to remember the Armada books of ghost stories. That was my
It,
generation's
that's
introduction
ringing a bell
to
though, because
ghost stories. Yeah.
a lot of what I was exposed to was like either my dad's books or my brother's. And we'd go to a lot of like car boot sales and things. So I'd often end up reading really old books. Definitely collections of ghost stories for sure were on the list. I loved any collections of stories actually. Um, so yeah, that's ringing a bell. I feel like I might have encountered that.
Mm.
Hmm.
So what was the first ever horror movie that you saw?
Ooh. It's hard to remember the first ever because I think I was probably very, very young.
Mm.
But definitely among them would have been um, maybe the original, like the first Alien movie.
Mhm.
Um, The Omen would have been one of the first. All the Freddy Krueger movies, which still I find deeply troubling, like more than they should. I think they
Well,
just really
yes.
got under your skin, especially when you watch them
Mm.
when you're a child. There's something about something coming for you in your nightmares that seems
Yes.
weirdly possible, like something you should watch out for.
Mm. I think the notion that if you dream of Freddy Krueger and you die in your dreams, do you actually really die? That whole idea,
Uh-huh.
you die
It's
in your dreams, you die for real.
Yeah, it's
So
just
for
such a
me,
creepy concept.
I went through a phase of dreaming about Freddy Krueger, and each
Oh
time I was
no.
kind of aware,
Oh,
because he killed me every time when I woke up. So
well,
that
that's
put
good to
paid to
know.
that one. What made you decide to go into the movies yourself?
It was kind of a roundabout trip to it, to be honest. I finished like high school, secondary school, as it's called in Ireland, and because we're lucky enough that third level education is free in Ireland, pretty much everybody goes. So I had no idea really what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to do something creative. So I applied to a few different degrees, in English or cultural studies, or the one that I most wanted to do was media arts, because it was a lot of different things. So it was radio, television, film, photography, just kind of a lot of different things. So I felt like if I could try my hand at a lot of things, I might figure out what my calling might hopefully be.
Yes, yes.
And honestly, I found it quite difficult personality wise. There were a lot of big characters in my class, and most of them wanted to be directors. They were very just confident, assured people
Yeah,
somehow, even though we were all, pretty much the same age, like 18 or whatever. So I kind of struggled with it until we got to the script writing module. And then I just
yes.
felt like, oh, thank God, I can do this part. Like I've always written. And this is just a different kind of storytelling that I can really quite enjoy because it's so structured, which I also like. So it was really at that point that I figured out, okay, this is something I can do. This is what I would like to be doing. So the studying it was the first step towards that. Really, just in terms of learning that that was something that I enjoyed and something that I could hopefully do. After that, it was still a journey towards making that an actual career, but that was the beginning.
Right. So how old were you when you wrote your first story?
Oh, first story. Oh, God. As soon as I could write, I think probably 4.
Wow.
Yeah, I never really stopped. I was much more prolific then, to be honest. Like I'd always try to write, like make these little books. They're really just short stories, but
Yeah.
usually fantasy, but with some elements, like dark elements to them for a child at least. Um, so there was a lot of, and but it was all a dream happening in my stories back then. But even then, I think I was good at it for my age or whatever, and it was just always something that I loved to do. I think because my brothers were so much older, again, they're like 10 and 11 years older than me. They were off doing their own thing, so I kind of had to amuse myself.
Yeah.
um, so I enjoyed just creating and losing myself in these worlds, whether it was reading or writing. It's
Yeah.
something that has always been just a great escape for me.
So you must have been reading at the age of 4.
Yeah, my mother actually taught me to read and write before I started school. So I was 3, I think, when um, I could recognize words. So I think that really
Mm.
helped me actually in that when I started school, I felt like I was at an advantage. So that gave me the
Yes.
confidence that I can be good at this. I can be good at something. Um,
Mm. Mm.
that really helped me. I think having a start like that early in life, I'm very very grateful for.
Yes. Yes, I was reading at age 4, which was actually self-taught. And
Oh wow,
after I
that's
was reading
amazing.
quite fluently, my grandfather taught me the alphabet. And my grandmother, she taught me some basic maths. Um, Divorced parents back in the days when it was a disadvantage, so my grandmother thought she'll give me this advantage.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's
unfortunately, the
lovely.
maths advantage soon ran out. I never did, to this day, can't do the times tables. But I am seriously impressed that you wrote a whole story age 4. Even if it is the only a dream ending, it's still a complete story. But I
Thanks.
was Googling you and looking up your IMDb, and I have to refer to my notes here. But it says here about a movie called Ransom that was
Hmm.
nominated for an Oniris Award and won 2 Vegas Movie Awards, Best Indie Feature and Best Screenwriter. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, that was a fun one. One of my rare forays into comedy. It was still a horror film, like a black comedy.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it was a film I was approached to write by a friend,
Yeah.
basically from Norway. He's an actor, and he was working with a director, friend of his at the time. So they just kind of came together to produce it, and they just did a really amazing job. It's so slick, and
Yeah.
they played the two main parts themselves as well, and just really, it just has such tone in the way that only I think Scandinavian films can have. I just think they do black comedy so well because it's so dry, and that
Yes.
just really works well with my dry Irish sense of humor. So so I enjoyed that. I would love to do a project with those guys again. Actually, that was fun. It's always nice to do something just a little bit different from time to time and stretch your writing chops.
Did they actually give you any particular plaque or ornament as the award?
No, you rarely really get anything for these things, to be honest. But it's always nice to hear that that people have enjoyed it. Like for me, it's more that whether the audience enjoys it. I'm not so fussed
Yes.
about awards and all that stuff. I think when you start out in the beginning, you think that's the goal and you're really excited about it and you think that's going to change things and make you feel like you've made it. But really, that stuff matters less and less as you go on. Success is more about, I think, especially in the
Yeah.
creative industries, just being able to keep doing it, and having
Yeah.
people who will support you. That's really the thing that matters most of all, and that's most rewarding. You know, having people enjoy your work and that
Yes.
it can
Oh,
mean
yes.
something to them.
Yes. Yes. I really that really rings a bell with me because finding that people all around the world have listened to or seen your movies and have appreciated them and said so. Um, it's a wonderful feeling. When
Mhm.
did you move to Scotland?
Um, 14 years ago now. So I've been here a long time. uh, yeah, basically, how that all kind of happened was I was at that point still sort of an aspiring screenwriter, really. I'd done some work. I'd written quite a few short films for people that got produced, and I'd done some work as a script reader in Ireland. But I was basically part of this online community called DVX User. I don't know if it's still going, might be, but um, and Laurie Brewster was also on, and they had this monthly challenge where people would come together and make a short film, basically. So I was an aspiring writer, he was an aspiring director, and we ended up working together on a short film, and then another one, and then another one, and just over time, we just kind of kept working with each other and
Yeah.
realized that we had quite complementary skills and goals and ambitions. And yeah, eventually I quit my office job, um, moved
Mhm.
country, started Hex Media, and here we still are somehow all these years later.
Still going strong, yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. It's
Because
crazy.
my next question was going to ask how you met him, but
There you go.
so
Sorry.
there you go. That's right. So how many movies have the two of you collaborated on so far?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I have a number, but it's got to be maybe around 10 or more at this point. Something like that. Yeah, maybe 10.
Hmm. Of all of that you've done so far, which are you the proudest of?
That's a tricky one because I'm proud of different elements of different films.
Yeah,
Personally, as a writer, I think The Unkindness of Ravens is the one I'm most proud of. Um,
yes.
so I just feel like that's a really raw, emotional, personal, dramatic
Mm,
story, and I enjoyed being able to explore a topic that I feel quite passionately about, which is PTSD and
yes.
people's struggles with it. It also allowed me to use my poetry writing skills.
Mm,
So I wrote all the poems for the film, and I performed some songs in it too. So I guess I feel like that one has a lot of me in it,
yes.
and I think everybody just did an incredible job with that, bringing it to life in a way that felt very raw and real. I think there's always, with any film you make, there's always things
Yes.
that you would like to do better. Otherwise, I think you'd never you wouldn't want to keep going, what would be the point? But I'm proud of what we put together with that one, and especially when, like, after one of the screenings, we had a veteran who himself suffered from PTSD come up to us and tell us that we got it right, and that it really resonated with him, and that's really stuck with me. Like, that's what you dream of, what you hope for when you make something like that.
To get it real. That was the movie that brought your company to my attention.
Oh,
But I have
right.
to admit, I have not yet seen it. So my bad.
Okay. I think it's on, I'm pretty sure it's on Prime at the moment. I think
Hmm.
so, anyway.
I'll have to have a
Um,
look.
mhm.
Yes, it's yeah. Finding out of quite often you hear people will tell you a thing is on Prime and it's actually on Prime USA or something, but
Yeah.
I'll definitely
Yeah.
have
I
a
think
look
it's
for
on the
that
UK,
one.
UK one. It might be like 99p or something. I'm not sure, but might be in luck. Might be free.
Right, so Lord of Tears. Who came up with the notion of the Owl Man?
That was kind of a collaborative creation between me and Laurie and a guy who has worked with us lots of times called Gavin Robertson,
Yeah,
who designed the costume. I think it was Laurie originally who came up with the idea with an owl-headed creature. It was just an image that he'd seen somewhere, um, that he then adjusted to be exactly the way he's
yeah,
portrayed it, with the Victorian tail suit and the claws and all the rest. Then it was me who basically took that visual idea away and created mythology for the owl man, like where he came from and who he might be, and the theology behind it, and
mm,
the way that he speaks and moves, and so yeah, that was very much a collaborative affair
yeah,
for sure, between like the three of us, really. But yeah, we never knew what a massive effect that character would have,
mm,
beyond even the film, really.
yeah. So were you involved in any of the Owl Man pranks at all?
Yes, yeah. I was partially responsible for setting those up.
All right.
um, yeah, so that was fun. I mean, it was a strange time because
Mm,
on the one hand, they were so successful and they had such an amazing reach, and they really, really did help us with our
yes.
marketing. But after a certain point, we realized that the most of the people who were on that YouTube channel were there just for the pranks. And so at a certain
Ah,
point, we kind of had to ask ourselves, well, is this what we want to be doing? We didn't
yes,
start this
yes.
company or get into film to make YouTube pranks. That was supposed to be marketing, not the end product. So we kind of abandoned the idea eventually, but it was so much
Mm,
fun when we were doing them. I did really, really enjoy it, and they did really help to spread awareness of that old man and
yeah,
help us to sell some copies of the film. So very, very grateful for that.
yeah. Did you have anybody react badly to them?
um, Not particularly. I think Scottish people in general tend to be quite polite and reserved, which is lucky. I don't know if you could necessarily get away with doing it in many other countries. um, but we were very quick to explain, that it was just a joke, and if they didn't want to be in a video, they didn't have to be, and we kind of gave them a treat. And mostly people were excited at the fact that something out of the ordinary had happened to them, and that they were
Yes.
about to be somewhat made into stars of YouTube. So and it became much harder to do it in the end because people were so aware of them.
All right. Yeah,
So it kind of ruined the surprise a little bit. Um, but no, it was fun while it lasted, for sure.
definitely. Who made the Owl Man mask?
Oh gosh, can I remember the woman's name? It was just an actual, like, a local artist. She hadn't ever made um, any like horror stuff before. She hadn't made film props before. She was just a lady who was very good at making things in general. A friend of a friend. Um, I can't remember the woman's name. That's the only time we've ever worked with her, because we haven't really had anything
Right.
like that we made again. But Yeah, just a local artist from Fife, basically.
So there's a lot of talent locally.
Yeah, an amazing amount. It's a shame because it's a part of Scotland where it's very sort of blue collar. There's not really the idea that that you can pursue the creative industries as a career. That would just be kind
Hmm.
of laughed at. There's not a lot of opportunity in the area for that kind of thing. Certainly not something that you could make a living off of. But there's actually an enormous amount of creative talent of all kinds, and so many of them are applicable to film. Like, we're really lucky. We've now got like a group of people that work with us and volunteer with us, um, with a vast array of skills, from carpentry to photography to acting and prop making and costume design. And so it's been so nice to be able to harness that and give people opportunities to work in an arena that they never thought would have been possible. Certainly not without traveling to London or abroad, that they're able to stay in the local area and use their skills and be involved in something that is rewarding like that. So no, that's one of my favorite things about it, to be honest.
Yes, I've seen some of the work that's been going into the new studio. Can you tell me anything about what's going on there?
Yeah, so basically we've got a over 200-year-old theater building
Mm.
that we're working in. Very lucky to be working in, which we're at the moment transforming some of the spaces into what will be sets for
Yes.
the Amicus movie that we're going to be making. So we've been one room in particular put an insane amount of work
Mm.
into, with thanks to so many people who've helped us, to basically bring it back to its former sort of Victorian glory, but in a way that
Mm.
will allow it to play lots of different parts in lots of different films in future, basically.
Yes.
Um, so it's going to be like a hospital ward at one point. It's going to be
Mm.
like a lounge bar in the 70s at one point. So we're going to get our money's worth out of that room for sure.
Definitely, definitely. Yes, it's impressive, seriously impressive, the amount of work that's going into it. I'd like to go back in time a little bit,
Sure.
to talk about the sequel to Lord of Tears, The Black Gloves.
Mhm.
How did you manage to get Macarena Gomez to sign up?
Yeah, that was amazing. That was really exciting. Um, basically, it was pretty simple. I think it was just luck that she had been wanting to do an English language project for a while, but nothing had come along that she was particularly enamored with, I guess. And I think we were just lucky that we caught her at the right time.
Mm.
She'd wanted to visit Scotland for a while, um, and she liked our previous films. So yeah, we just basically reached out to her agent, and she was instantly really up for it. And she was amazing to work with. She's a really powerful, strong, interesting, funny, kind
Yes.
person. She's been very supportive all along, and just an incredible professional. Like,
Mm.
I remember one time I told her, "Look, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to change the schedule for tomorrow. So we're going to be doing this scene and this scene instead of what we had planned." And she was just like, "It's fine. I know the whole script. I can do any scene anytime." So yeah, she's
That
amazing. I
is,
loved working with her.
think you'll be working with her again?
Who knows? Yeah, if the right project came up, I guess we just haven't had a part that would be suitable for a while. But absolutely, I would love to work with her again. And yeah, I would hope
Fabulous.
that she would come back.
Great. And now sort of to move forward to The Devil's Machine, originally called Automata. Why did you change the title?
I think nobody it seemed like nobody knew how to pronounce it. um, yeah. So I think it was a slightly more accessible mainstream sort of name. It's always really hard to know what to call things. I think we always sort of struggle
Mm,
with it because there's always an option to go down a more arty indie route or a more mainstream route.
yeah.
We try to always kind of find a balance so that it can do both. We'll sometimes, I guess, also have a name that we give it, and then a distributor might give it another name, which you don't have much control over. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was always a fan of Automata, to be honest. I kind of preferred that. But the Devil's Machine still works.
So the whole notion behind it of basically a living automaton. I don't want to sort of spoil the movie for
Sure.
people who haven't seen it yet. That was one powerful script, one really can you tell me some more about what into writing it and into filming it?
Yeah, it's a very very intense film that is very multifaceted. There's a lot happening. There's a lot going on at every level, I think, with that film. But for me, the part that I was most passionate about was telling a story of generational trauma and the when something terrible happens, the ripples that that sends through time and how it hurts not just the people involved, but anyone who comes into contact um, with that story. So that was the kind of that was my in, and that was what I tried to infuse the whole story with. I always do try to do that with our horror films, to have, yeah, you've got your superficial story on the surface, but it's also always trying to speak about some other fundamental human issue that we face, or sociological issue. um, so so for me, that was what was most interesting about writing that script. Weaving all of those different layers in a way that felt right when you're dealing with such a dark
Yeah.
topic was very tricky. It was very tricky. um, and I think it's also very difficult when you are working with smaller budgets to rein
Yeah.
in your ambition, you know, to try and pitch it just at
Hmm.
the right level. So that's something that we always try to balance. But that film was quite over the top in a lot of ways. But I hope that still the core of the story and its heart and its twists and turns still come through in a way that's satisfying.
So why did you decide not to actually show the inside of the um the automata? Was
I
it
think
just you thought it was too gruesome, perhaps, or
yeah, I think we're always a little bit reserved to an extent. Not with all the films we make, but we kind of will set a tone with each film. And when they are this, when it's a more, I guess, traditional, classic kind of a ghost story with supernatural
yeah?
elements, we tend to make it more mysterious, less showing. Um, because like for me, those are the films that I like the most, you know, things like The Haunting or The
Mm,
Innocents, where you never really see very much. A lot of it is implied, a lot of it
yes.
is just under the surface. Your imagination does a lot of the work for you. So for me at least, I mostly prefer not to see too much,
Mm.
and to keep something back.
Right. I was quite surprised when, instead of making another horror movie, you changed directions and went with the Dragon Knight to go into the world of sword and sorcery. What made you decide to do that?
Yeah, so that was more of a commercial choice, I guess. That when we basically, for the first time, kind of explored working with a distributor. Fantasy is
Yeah.
something that we both always loved, especially in terms of literature. Um, so when we kind of had the opportunity to do something, we jumped at it, even though we were a little bit reluctant because we hadn't really worked in that way before. We'd always been so independent and, you know, had complete control over everything. Um, so it's kind of a foray, I would say, Dragon Knight. We learned a lot of lessons from that. There's a lot of things we would have done differently, I think. Um, but I really loved writing a fantasy story, I have
Hmm.
to say, because it's so unbridled, but it is also extremely difficult to make a fantasy film with a low budget, much harder than it is
Yes.
horror. So that's tricky because you always want to try to write something that feels epic, but you kind of have to keep it small and personal,
Mm.
when you're working with those sort of budget levels. So that's a tricky balance. Um, so I would never say no to writing more fantasy, and we
Yeah.
will make more fantasy films for sure. But I think we're also looking forward to going back to our indie
Mm.
horror roots a bit more in the coming years.
Yes, because you also, I believe you're the writer on The Slave and the Sorcerer, am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So I
so
wrote the
there's more
story for that
fantasy.
one. Mhm.
Yeah, more fantasy for us to see. Did you make much use of CGI in these films?
For Dragon Knight, there's an element. We always try to do as little as possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't employ real dragons, so those have to be CGI. For Slave and the Sorcerer, especially, and I think after the experience of Dragon Knight, we made it very practical, very old school, like it's
Yeah.
proper 70s, 80s style. I always prefer that. Like, even if it doesn't look perfect, it just hits differently. It just,
Yeah.
because you know that actually happened, it affects you in a way that CGI never
Yeah.
can. So whenever it's possible, we do like to do things practically. But in terms of, obviously, if it's like a massive battle scene or a dragon or these kind of elements people expect to see,
Mm.
certainly at least in a trailer for a fantasy film, you don't have much choice. We just do our best to do it as
Yeah.
minimally and tastefully as we can.
Yes. So when it comes to actually writing, do you have any particular ritual that you go through, or any particular writing habits you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, sure. Several, I guess. um, the I guess the first thing I do is I'll spend a lot of time researching, very sort of loosely, just searching for anything that might add some depth or um, something new, some texture to what I'm writing. So I'll often research myths,
Hmm.
or psychological phenomena, or um, historical characters that might make an interesting addition. So just very very loose sort of brainstorming
Mm.
openness, um, for a good. I mean, as long as I can, as it depends on the deadline, obviously. But I like to just put as much in as I
Yes.
can before I start to put words on the page. Um, I'll also pretty much always create like a playlist, like a music playlist for each film that fits the tone, and different songs have different sort of uh, that evoke different emotion. So that, say, I'm
Yes.
writing an
Yes.
angry scene, I've got an angry song. I'm writing a sad scene, I've got some tragic classical melodies going on. So I find music to be very helpful when writing, but it's very tricky to find the right kind of music because it needs to evoke something but not be distracting. So that would be the next stage for me. After
Yes.
that, like the best advice I can give anyone, and the best sort of tips I've learned in terms of writing, especially if you're writing something longer form like a screenplay, is to
Yeah.
start really small. Like, literally just have a list of bullet points to begin with, because if you're going to dive straight into trying to write a whole feature film, you're going to get stuck.
Yeah.
Um, you're going to hit a wall at a certain point, and it become overwhelmed and possibly quit. So I think the
Mm.
smaller you can start and then build that up slowly. Like, I'll start with bullet points.
Yeah.
I'll then sort of flesh out those bullet points, make them paragraphs, and then bit by bit by bit build it up to something that
Mm.
feels sort of structured enough.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the subject of music, because now I'd like to ask about Metaphorest. What made you decide to plunge
Yes.
into music?
Well, it's actually something that I've also always done, like from as far back as I can remember. I've always just I'll write anything. So I would write songs, I would write poems, I would write stories. And I had like a little toy piano, I think, again, when I was only maybe 3 or 4, that I would just tinker away on and make up melodies on the fly.
Yeah,
So it's something that's kind of always been part of my life. And when I was about 15, my brother taught me to play guitar. So from that point, I started to actually properly write and record
right.
songs. So I've been doing it for a long time. It's always been something that's been sort of on the side, but also it is um, absolutely like as much of a passion as film, just in a different way. It's a different
Yeah.
creative outlet that ticks different boxes for me. So it is a real love and something that I think I'll always do.
Yes, so when I have heard, and as I have listened to your music, and for you, those of you who are listening, she has a beautiful voice,
Thank you.
seriously beautiful voice. But I'm very much reminded of Enya and the Cocteau Twins. Are they particular influences on you?
I mean, being Irish, you can't avoid Enya. um, and actually, funny
Being
enough,
English, you can't avoid Enya either.
that's true. Yeah, she's out there. She demands
Yes.
to be heard. Um, I was never a massive fan of like Celtic kind of music, to be honest, growing up.
Mm,
But definitely the sort of haunting, ethereal element for sure is something that I aspire to. Weirdly enough, actually, when I was a teenager, friends of mine were the children of Enya's producer. So the first
mm,
I had to do an interview for in college at one point, so I actually got to go to Enya's recording studio and speak to her producer.
lovely.
That was crazy. I didn't meet her or anything, but um, so yeah, I guess probably maybe even without thinking, she will have been an inspiration for sure. She was part of the soundtrack to my childhood, definitely. And Cocktail Twins I actually I hadn't really listened to much until maybe the last 5-10 years, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're amazing. I mean, the sort of again the harmonies, the sort of ethereal, soft, um, kind of melodic, lullaby kind of music that they make
Yes.
is one. Yes, definitely the kind of sound that I aspire to for sure.
Well, we're coming towards the end of this interview now, because I know you have something to get to afterwards. But would you like to talk about any projects that you have in the pipeline?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've got a ton of stuff coming up with Hex. We spent a lot of last year shooting a lot of films back to back in a way that almost killed us all. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but I'm very excited about them. There's some really good stuff coming up. So we just put out The Slave and the Sorcerer. We just um, released that to our wonderful, amazing Kickstarter backers. So before too long, we'll be working on the sequel to that. Also, of course, we've got our Amicus production that we're going to be working on this year. That's what the set build is all about. So that's I mean that's incredible. Like to
Mm,
have the Amicus name and be able to revive uh, a studio that we all hold very dear is it's a massive responsibility, but it's very exciting. So I'm really looking forward to that. And again, that's sort of returning to our uh, supernatural indie horror roots in a way that feels really good. So that's coming up. Um, we've got another For We Are Many horror anthology that we're going to be putting out
good.
pretty soon.
Yeah,
So that's cool. We've been able to give opportunities to a lot of
I'll
new
be
up and
getting that.
coming horror filmmakers, which always feels great.
Hmm.
I've even got a short in there. Uh, so, gosh, we've got another book of beastly creatures that I'm working on at the moment. We've got some amazing contributors to that, so I'm really excited to share the news about that one later this year. Again, that's going to be coming out. So it's kind of all go, all go.
Yes. You certainly won't be bored.
No, no, definitely not. Chance would be a fun thing. Yeah, no,
Okay.
we never stop. We don't know what else to do with ourselves if we're not producing.
Mm.
So
Do you have any advice for any aspiring filmmakers who might be in the audience?
Um, Absolutely. Well, I think just find like-minded people who have the same aspirations as you and who are looking to actually get out there and do things, and then just go and do things. Find your little team, find your people, make stuff. It's the only way. And when we made our first feature, it was because it was a really horrible winter and the snow wasn't going away and it looked really cool. I'd just gotten a DSLR camera for Christmas from my brother. So we just went out in the snow with a friend of ours, shot a feature film, and in its own weird way, everything else that's happened since has been because of that. Just going out with no
Yeah,
money, just a friend and a camera and a backdrop, and just doing it. So just go and make things. Like, don't think about it too much. Don't stress about it. Don't be too
yeah,
precious and think that, oh, this has to be perfect and amazing and this is the key and this is going to make my career. No, this is going to, probably the first thing isn't going to be very good. That's fine. You learn, and you keep learning, keep making. And really the only key to success as a creative is just keep doing it. Like, just
yeah,
don't give up. It takes a long time to get to a place where it can be your job, but it is possible. It's absolutely possible. Um,
mhm,
and yeah, it's just tenacity more than anything else.
yeah. Okay, so going into the last couple of minutes, are there any artists, movie makers, authors, underrated that do you think we should be looking into?
Oh gosh, I tend to live in my own little bubble, to be honest. We just make things. I don't really have time to watch or read anything anymore these days. Um, I mean, an Irish female director that I think is fantastic, called Aisling Clark, who I
Yes, I've heard of her.
definitely say keep an eye on, because she's not only very talented, but she's incredibly hardworking and smart and a really lovely, open, nice person, which I can appreciate above all else, I think. Um, so definitely check her out. Um, who else could I think of? Yeah. It's a struggle. I mean, at the moment, like, we're just doing our best to try to lift people up
Yes.
that we know, giving them opportunities to make short films and features in the pipeline. So keep an eye on us. We're trying to create a little factory of um, showcasing new horror talent from across the UK. So yeah, that's kind of how we try to help people.
But you certainly do. I've seen it in action myself. And
Oh,
also
thanks.
as a great inspiration. On a personal level, I find that if I wait for things to be perfect, I'll never do anything, including eat breakfast. So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
anyway, I'm very grateful to you for showing up and doing this interview.
Oh, it's my
And it's
pleasure.
nice to see we've had quite a few people coming in and commenting. I'm
Oh, thanks,
grateful
guys.
to all of you. And thank you to the people who came along to listen and to comment. And thank you to everybody who is listening to this at a later date. No, I'm nothing without an audience. Well, that sounds awfully narcissistic.
There's so
What
much
I
more
mean
to you
to
to
say
it.
is thank you. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you most of all, Sarah. I hope we can do it again sometime.
I would love to.
And I wish you the very best in your future career. And
Thanks, Emma.
now I'm waving my little jester doll at you and signing off. Good
Bye.
night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Julia.